And welcome everyone to How to Combat Blowback with our special guest, John Euler, today. As Sharon Danley here speaking to you, of course. And I just want to make the point that Canada has led the way to having Bill C-16 dubbed the Predator Protection Act, from my perspective, resulting in Canadian biological women and girls having been put at high risk. The Equality Act in the US and the UK are under review and going in the same unfortunate direction. The cult activists aspects of the drag, trans, LGBT, and the ever revealing pedophile communities are infiltrating women's and girls' safe and private spaces and entering libraries, schools, churches, universities with the intention to groom and gender confuse children. Bill C-16's throws women's and girls under the bus, and it is sanctioned by the Canadian government. The cult activists' tactics are terrorist style, with doxing, slander, deplatforming, getting people fired, horrendous bullying, and every effort is made to torment anyone for speaking up. Now, we have our guest, John Euler, with us today. And just a little housekeeping before we get going. There's a link right above you that says eCam Live. And in order for us to see who you are and your name, you'll need to click on that live link, which will take you to a second page that looks something like, where did it go? Well, it doesn't matter. It's a page that shows you have to click one more time so that we can then bring you on and see your who you are and your picture of your profile. Now, if you want anonymity, don't do a thing. Just sit back and enjoy. All right, let's bring John in. Welcome, John. How are you? I see you have a looks like a bandage as a
Oh, that's right. My battle wound.
battle. Your
That's
brain
right.
explode.
This is where I get to tell people that I just discovered that I had a little skin cancer, little benign skin cancer. So I get to tell people as a public service announcement that if you have a little, I just hadn't been up on skin cancer. So take care of yourselves. If you notice anything, mine was painless. I just noticed a little, I thought it was from my glasses. It was a little
Yeah.
scab and
Oh well.
more than that. So a little trivia for anybody watching. If you have anything on your skin anywhere that you kind of notice, how
Yeah.
to take care of
Check it out for
it.
sure.
So that's, I could have come up with a different story with that.
I would have bought that your brains are exploding, but that's okay.
That's right. Keep my eyes bugging in and
Yeah,
just,
exactly. Exactly. Okay, John. So our first question out of the chute. How do we approach this subject and talk to people and parents about the dangers of predators lurking around children in the drag queen story hours at libraries and now being rolled out across North America in our schools across the country, and there's having the same problem in the UK.
that's right. And it's growing everywhere, even in probably over in Europe. And that's the question. What do we do? How do we introduce this topic? And I would say that because it's so extreme in this sense, it's a little unusual for men, as I now always say, men wearing women's underwear and drag. Um, it's unusual to see them in mainstream society. And that's really part of the issue. What men want to do, and this is important, because this is not about lifestyles. People call us homophobic and transphobic and phobic and all that. Not at all. This is all about child safety. And that's probably the most important thing for all of us to keep in mind. What is the goal here? The goal is to keep kids safe. So how do you introduce this topic? Well, you have to begin to help people consider what I never would have thought. None of us would have thought that these are guys, these are anything other than kind of quirky guys that like to dress up. but what if? What if these are different? And so as we talk to folks about it, I don't know if necessarily in one fell swoop we're going to be able to help them understand really what's going on, because they're going to have to begin to have a tectonic shift in their thinking that there may actually be predators that intend to harm kids, and they're using this as a means of grooming. And so we're going to be talking to a lot of different people in a lot of different stages of thinking about this. Everything from people that have never heard of it to people that have sort of heard of it, people that are convinced it's just nothing other than, entertainment for the kids, kind of like a clown. So it's bringing to their awareness. Even today, we have a family member that this was new information to them. And so it's introducing a concept, introducing that this is a reality that's going on right now. Also, I want to throw out the concept of furries. Okay, we're gonna start talking about furries at some point in time. Furries are men that dress up in big furry costumes. If you don't know what those are, I didn't know what it was until working at the prison. Google Furrie, and I'm convinced they are just as dark as far as grooming. Now, is every single person that dresses in drag or dresses in a fur, are they a predator? I'm not saying that. Are there predators in there? Absolutely. There's predators wherever kids are. What percentage? I think wherever you have deviant people doing different, deviant things, dressing up in a costume is outside the norm. So if a man's doing that, it's a little different. So it's really introducing this concept, this reality, and then beginning to help people ponder or consider the fact that the guy that looks sort of funny might actually not be what we think he is. He actually might be a child predator. And is this safe for kids? So.
Okay. Well, let me get you myself back here with you. Thank you, John. Well, there's another part to this question too. When we speak up about these issues, especially with our family and our friends, and we receive blowback. I mean, we get called names, aspersions ad hominems. They exaggerate what we've said, in our statements, and often we feel pure hate coming from them. So how can we combat the blowback in ways that leaves the door open, keeps this serious issue on the table, while also honoring our own selves?
Right. Well, I think we have two different things. One is if we're having a discussion in person with someone versus on the internet. If you're on social media, the two places I'm on are Facebook and Twitter. I don't have time for any more than that. That's where you're going to get a lot of predators. And it's very interesting. It's pretty much an either or proposition online. So we'll talk about that. They will find you. These predators, I call them predator apologists, otherwise known as co-conspirators. Okay? Because bottom line, the question is, why would an adult be very energetic in terms of defending this kind of thing if they're starting to hear that there may be predators? Any normal person is going to listen to someone that might know something. 11 plus years working with sex offenders in a prison, about 4,000 predators. Most normal people will say, wow, I didn't know that. Tell me more. Because, of course, they're interested in protecting kids. If on the internet you get the opposite, and there's usually about 6 different levels that these guys do. I personally think the majority of them are predators. You certainly look for somebody hiding his identity. That's the very first thing. That's a huge red flag. You're going to encounter stuff on the internet, on social media, than you typically won't in person. Because the average person is not a predator looking to shut you down. So on the internet, we can talk about that. Sharon, you experienced today. Very interesting response. But I think in person, it's going to run the gamut and depends upon who we're talking to and why they're responding. If this is new information, you tend to get one of a couple things. They're just hearing it for the very first time. I had a good friend that sort of had to get off the phone just the other night. You could tell it was blowing her circuits. But she doesn't have any kids. But parents, especially parents of younger kids that are thinking about this, since we're all about child safety, that is the category that you might want to tend to focus on. So if you're a grandparent talking to your kids about the grandkids, if you're talking to aunts or uncles or brothers and sisters that have kids, and you want to introduce this topic because they're hearing about it more and more, this drag queen story hour. What is it? And so you'll have an opportunity to introduce the topic that, you know what, I know it may seem fun and games, but I've heard that actually child predators may be in their midst. And there have actually been some that have been arrested, unmasked and arrested, actual child sex offenders. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe that's the best way to start. And then you'll sense real fast, based upon response. If they're receptive, they're going to want to know more. If they're defensive, then it's probably one of a couple of things. And really, in these discussions, it's all about discerning. We only have so much time, effort, energy, emotional energy. If anybody is familiar with the New Testament, Jesus said, don't cast your pearls before swine. What is that? Time, effort, energy. Those things that are valuable and of value, because he said if you do, they're going to trample your pearls, and then they're actually going to turn on you. And so I think the first thing we want to try to get across is to help someone begin to consider that people that are acting deviant, it's not just deviant people, but we're talking about drag queens right now, that they may not be well-intended. They actually may be child predators. And that'll elicit a response. And then the question is what kind and how do you deal with that? But for me, it's trying to help people see what is the mindset of a predator. You got a man in drag. What's going on with him? Is he relatively harmless? Is he fun-loving? Is he just bored? Is he kind of a little different? Or is it a different ballgame? And at some point in time, Sharon, we can put up the that stair step.
Would you do that now?
Okay, let's do. You know what? We'll transition into it. I'm going to be mindful of time.
Here we go. It's up there.
And folks, I use this a lot. This came from my years working in prison, and I was driven to try to find out what causes someone to become not just a sex offender, but there's a lot of different types of sex offenders, but especially a child offender. Why? Because I had worked with survivors. And so I had a lot of reasons why I wanted to know. Now, it's not that I exclusively had access to these guys. A lot of clinicians work in prisons. Why they're not as interested, I have my own couple of ideas, but I was driven. I had a big whiteboard in my office. And I would chart, I would plot things out, and things started to gel. And Sharon, I'm not seeing it. I don't know if it is up there or not.
It's up there, John. Yes.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I wonder if I can see it. Not that I've got it memorized. So.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, wherever it is. We'll test my memory since I put it together.
Okay. If you can dial in the live.
Yeah, why don't you talk for a moment? I'll find it since I just wrote it. I'll bring it up. Sorry about that.
All right. Do you want to continue, or I can bring it up?
I've got it.
Okay.
So what you have in front of you. Oh, thank you. What you have in front of you is really, to be honest, I've never seen this published. Eventually, I'll publish it. And this, for anybody familiar with the Old Testament, quite frankly, this also should appear familiar as far as ancient wisdom literature from 2,000 years ago. I just added sort of my own twist to it. And really what you have with psychopathy, and if you look up psychopathy, you've got Robert Hare, James Fallon, and they've done wonderful jobs. You can look up the brains of psychopaths, and they're different. Now the question is, how did they become different? Because the reality is this. There's no debate as to whether or not a psychopath, his brain is different. Therefore, he thinks different. He responds differently. He is a different animal, and he'll never come back. That's what's important. Now the question is, how did they become that way? That's where people start to theorize. But James Fallon and Robert Hare, they put psychopaths in MRIs, and you look at the brain, the involuntary response to visual stimuli, different things. You can't contrive that. So that's how they determined there really is this phenomenon called psychopathy, old-fashioned term, a reprobate mind, reprobation. So for me, though, those gentlemen haven't worked in prison, not detracting from their work, but it's one thing to find out definitively, okay, we've got a different animal in a psychopath. Now the question is this: how does someone become that way? And the conclusions everybody else has drawn is understandable because it makes us a little more comfortable. We like to say, well, they're different than I am because I'm not a so we'll start to come up with theories such as they're born that way, they're hardwired that way, it's early trauma. I'm here to tell you it's not. Now there's other contributing factors, of course, but really bottom line, psychopathy is the result of continuing to violate conscience. Situation after situation, and you can plot it out. And as a matter of fact, let me make a plug for survivorsupport.net. We would love to have you contribute to, in terms of donation, but our membership for $7 a month. And that's where we will really start to build out charts like this. If you become a member, you'll have access to, you'll see a lot of different charts. But this is the primary concept that helps understand relationships, helps understand people and what they do. And so I've broken it into 10 levels.
John, I'm just going to interrupt here for a second. I have a few people asking if I can zoom it. I've made it the biggest I can. If you're on a phone, I would suggest turning your phone landscape wide. But what I will do is post this afterwards so that you can download it for yourselves on your own digital devices. Okay? All right, John, sorry. I just wanted to let you know.
That's fine, that's fine. So the best way to view anybody, quite frankly, but especially somebody that's into this weird sexual stuff is this. Not so much based upon their behavior, but what's under it, what's driving it. You can have two men dressing up in clown suits, dressing up in furries, dressing up in drag. Are they both the same? No. Well, how do you know? Because you watch them long enough and you're going to begin to see what is motivating them. If a man starts to become very motivated to hang out with somebody else's kids, that's a red flag. Okay, we're not talking about, none of us have ever started talking about RuPaul Drag Race.
Oh, yeah.
I've never talked about that. I've never even seen it. Apparently it's gone on for 11 years or something. Okay, why haven't we focused on that if we're homophobic? Okay, we're talking about guys that dress up as women that are accessing kids. Big difference. There are some guys that dress up in drag that have no interest in kids. Good. Then they're not. Then they're going to be in a different category. But the question is this: when I see someone, whether in a furry costume, drag, or wherever, or a priest or a pastor, it doesn't matter. The question is, what am I seeing in terms of overall violation of conscience? So I put a couple of different things. You'll see on the bottom: inadvertent selfishness, callous and indifferent, willful, and I can fill all that in. Okay. Under the surface, you have willfulness. The more somebody becomes, here it is, the more someone allows their ego to grow, selfishness grows. To the extent that selfishness grows, I start to morph into a black hole. It's all about me. And I start to negatively impact other people. My conscience is designed to do what? Keep me back in level one, but actually even up on top. Everybody goes into level one. That's part of being human, and that's where as iron sharpens iron, that's where communication comes in. That Sharon, if I do something and say, hey, John, don't know if you're aware of it, but, and I go, oh, okay. So number one, you'll find out to what extent do I care? Because if you bring it to my attention, and we're all there, okay, but you notice the color is still decent, it's still blue. That's called being human. But what happens if, with communication, in a New Testament terms, it says, let your yes be yes, no be no, and speak the truth in a reasonable fashion, speak the truth in love. That's how you maintain relationships. You kind of got off center a little bit, we're going to get you back on. That's self-evaluation, self-reflection. What happens if, Sharon, you bring to my attention, hey, John, it'd be nice, we're supposed to start at 7:30, you roll in at 7:40, nothing personal, but I'm counting on you. Okay. Is there any doubt now that I know? No, you shared it with me. Now I'm accountable. Now it went from inadvertent to now what am I going to do with that?
Right.
If I self-correct, now I'm going to go back up to the far left. But if I start to devalue you, if I start to disrespect you, I'm not respecting you as much as, quite frankly, God does, then I'm not going to take it seriously. But more than that, I won't care about the impact it has on you. So what will happen is this: I start to become callous.
Yeah.
I start to form a callus on my conscience. Right. So now it becomes easier for me to disregard you. So I really don't care. I'm not moved by compassion, moved by empathy. So I'm not moving back up. I actually kind of like, as the inmates used to say, I'm doing me. Mm-hmm. And so I gotta be me. Right. So I got to be true to myself. How many different ways can we say it? So that person then will start to, he's allowing self, he's allowing ego to grow. Now it's like a snowball. Well, you've already brought to my attention, sticking with that kind of analogy, and let's say I'm late again. Well, now we need to have another conversation, right? And so whether an employment situation, we're going to have counseling session number 2, parent with a child, doesn't matter where. But what it means is my behavior is following suit. It's following what's going on the inside of me. Now that we haven't even talked about porn yet. Right. That's the human dynamic, okay? So to the extent that I start to blow somebody else off, the extent that I start to care more about myself than anybody else, guess what I'm doing? I'm moving, and the rainbow color is this, quite frankly. The rainbow color is to highlight degrees of impact upon somebody else. It's a way of viewing it. Degrees of intentionality and degrees of impact, okay? So the more selfish I become, I'm starting to find it easier. I'm rationalizing, justifying, okay? And then it starts to become more and more clear that I am in it for me, but that'll only work so long because, Sharon, you're eventually going to call me on that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're either going to have boundaries. Your intuition will say, wait a second, something's going on. Now you'll find out if I've started to morph, because if I'm getting into about level 3, quite frankly, 2-ish, 3-ish now, if I still want something out of this relationship between you and me, I'm going to start to manipulate your intuition. I'm going to start to flip, the inmates would call it flip the script. I'm going to start to dismantle your intuition by making you doubt or question yourself.
Right.
I'm going to guilt trip you, right?
Yep.
Okay, now, why even bring any of this up? Because we haven't talked about men and porn yet. It's the same dynamic under the surface. Now we're going to layer it with porn. Okay. Now you've got selfishness that's layered with perversion. Mm-hmm. And the perversion will start to take hold. So therefore, underneath every porn influence eventually becomes saturated and then deviant. Deviant simply means this: I no longer care about the other person. It's right? I don't care if you're in the mood tonight or what. Okay, that's getting really dangerous. That's 50 Shades of Grey. And actually, that's even worse. And it also has to do with self-injury, that I'm actually now, in vernacular, common vernacular, I'm getting turned on because I can create pain in you. That's not normal. Mm-hmm. Okay. You start, and then you track with the kind of porn that these guys watch, and it will match these different levels until eventually, look what happens to the far right. And the question is for each of us, long before we talk to somebody else, quite frankly, if I were to ask myself, Drag Queen Story Hour, what category, what level would I put these guys at? I can tell you what level you all are probably. Guess what? Does that make a big difference? Yeah, because if I have a guy that dresses in drag and he's at a 2, or let's say he's at a 1, if I say, hey, you know what? Were you aware of the fact that there's actually guys at level 10 that are going to watch you and they see that kids are attracted to you? So by you dressing as a woman and going to read, a predator in level 10 who actually is all about defiling innocence.
Mm-hmm.
Not even sex and sexuality at that point.
No.
That's why chemical castration won't work. A little trivia. So if I tell a guy in drag at level 1, hey, by you going into a library, you're actually setting these kids up for, because they're not going to tell a drag queen person no. So now we have level 10 drag queen guy or a level 10 predator who sees a level 1 guy that dresses up. He says, that's all it takes. So now I have 2 drag queens side by side. I can have a level 1 and level 10, but nobody who hasn't dealt with sex offenders, and even me who dealt with them, you can't, they don't glow in the dark. And so what happens if this thing starts to grow, and for every one legitimate guy, we'll just call him, he's quirky and he does that, he wants to go make kids. What happens if he's gathering birds of a feather? So we start to have this whole flock of them. That's what we're concerned about, because level 10s, even more than that, right, they're gonna abuse kids.
Well, that's great, John. I'm just going to switch over here for a second, and we have some questions from people. So before we move further, I think it might be good to see what we can help with. Again, for those that are asking about the graphic, I'll post it right underneath this afterwards so that you can download it for yourselves and put it on any of your smart devices or whatever it is that you want. Okay. Now, so this person says, John, I want to support your website. That's terrific. And keep thinking, this other person says, I keep thinking about the recent HBO Michael Jackson documentary as far as grooming for access to children.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. See, it doesn't have to be a guy dressed up in drag.
No, no. And then Penny says, this is also known as gaslighting.
I would, yes, number one. Because a person that's getting more and more selfish is going to want it his way. He doesn't want to be told no. Why are people selfish? Because it works for them. We all do, right? But can you imagine if I decided, I don't really care about my conscience? That's weird to think. But the people in the far level 10, they actually, here it is, they are relieved not to have a conscience. As a matter of fact, the level 10 guy, psychopath, the whole thing is progressive psychopathy. A level 10 guy will look at a level 1 guy with disdain. At the prison, I developed this in the prison. So I would use this all the time with guys, and the only 2 people you encounter are level 1 and level 10, to be honest. And I had one older 10 guy. He was decent, but you knew he was really bad. But a gangster kind of guy, older. And he said, Euler, you know what? He said, you're such a Boy Scout. Now, they're coming from the U.S. I don't know about Canada, but think about right, Boy Scout, trustworthy. That's horrible. Don't you hate that? How many of the inmates would say, Mr. Euler, my Sally's taking my stuff. Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. I hate it when people are like that. Do you know how many friends I have that are like that? It just bugs me how giving and kind and trustworthy they are. But why do they use that in a pejorative sense? Because it's like oil and water by that time. And so the further somebody, I'm staring at my screen here, the further someone goes into those higher categories, level 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, they're actually driven to mar, here it is, to mar the goodness. And that's why when you look at the cover of 50 Shades of Grey, okay, what's going on is a guy is marring the everything about that woman. He's disrespecting her. Why? Because he's driven to do that.
Right, right. And here's where this person comes up with boundaries are so important to teach children.
Right.
Absolutely. Now, this person is saying, help me understand why castration doesn't work.
Excellent point. I would have thought so, right? And I still, working in the prison, thought it was going to be a good idea until I heard it from the inmates. And that's where the value, that's why a lot of researchers, those that do research that are academics, they'll never get at the truth. I mean, they'll get it some. I mean, I wouldn't have understood the value of being embedded in a prison because these guys are the world's greatest liars, and they're always on guard, and they're always floating stuff out there that's going to benefit them because they know people are listening, and it's always practice for parole, quite frankly. So I would have assumed chemical castration, or I like the other kind, that it'll work, but that's because we're coming from a normal perspective. But when you think in terms of deviance, it's not about sex and sexuality. That's why the further you go, these guys don't even lust. They don't even lust normally. It's all about injuring someone. It's all about not just power and control. This is about marring and here it is, and traumatizing. So that's why the most deviant of people oftentimes, sorry to be graphic, they can't even get an erection sometimes. They'll use objects. Now, I'm sorry to, but right? So, right? So if you take a guy who's a pedophile and you chemically castrate him, in my estimation, he will be more intent and intense about harming kids. And I derived that from these inmates. We had a discussion one time, and there were a couple of the most deviant inmates that said, I hope that comes to Pennsylvania. I'm thinking, oh my gosh. Well, yeah, Mr. Euler, I'm right. I'll undergo that. Well, who in the right mind, right? And they said, well, because then, you know what, we might not even have to go through sex offender treatment. We can get out. There.
Yes, right there. Yes, right there. Okay. Pauline says, pretty sure drag was never meant for children, but Tranada, meaning Canada, sure thinks otherwise.
Yeah. But again, this is a very sophisticated plan. If you go on survivorsupport.net, if you go under the Insights tab, okay, I've used social media really to put together pieces of curriculum. Eventually, there'll be a lot of written stuff. You're going to see, if you go down far enough, you'll see the Predator game plan. Click on that and read all that stuff. I put characteristics of predators on there, but there's a game plan, folks. Yeah. I never used to think it. I didn't want to think it, but you know what? This all makes sense to me now. Drag Queen Story Hour, I want to bring this up. Drag Queen Story Hour is the farm team of the trans movement. Where did we get the trans movement from? From 13 individuals that changed the DSM, that floated this concept of gender fluidity, what's the term? I'm forgetting it. Dysphoria, okay? Yeah. Now, is that slow down. In very few cases, well, how can you, this thing has exploded as far as kids now saying, I may be a boy when I'm a girl, and I'm a girl and I may be a boy. Where did that come from? That is not by accident, okay? Underneath every pedophile's psyche is all about accessing kids. How do you do that? You have to groom them. How do you groom them? You groom the parents. But what's the objective? To get your hands on them, but not just get your hands on them, to get your hands on them and keep them quiet. Well, how do you do that? Now you have to think like a cult leader. Think about Keith Raniere and Allison Mack. Think about Jeffrey Epstein. But a cult leader, Keith Raniere, how did he take adults and get them to submit to branding? And that, now those are adults with adult minds. Okay, but with kids, you've got social influence. So the trans movement really is comprised of three things. Autistic kids that already have a tough time with intuition. So they're sitting ducks, okay, for predators. And they're in special ed classes. That's where a lot of, sorry, but I know too much. Okay, so those with autism, those that have already been preyed upon, those that are young sexual survivors, sexual abuse survivors, and then those that are being programmed or influenced by social media. Either way, they're easy pickings for for predators. And so of all the people in the trans movement, very few are are the ones that we care about. There are some legitimately hurting kids. Yeah. The majority of them are perps.
Yes.
And they're taking advantage of the kids. How do we know? Because if it was really all about the kids, these others would be very supportive of independent, autonomous decision-making where they want to detransition.
And they're not.
But you go on social media and you listen to what happens and who attacks these young people when they realize, you know what? I was a guy, I became a girl. I don't want to be a girl anymore. I want to, or vice versa. And
Yeah,
so it's like the Hotel California. You can
right.
check in, but you ain't. They're going to be assured. Why? Because then you know too much. You're a liability. James Shoup on Twitter. I recommend everybody go on and look him up because his case is precedent setting and he's seen the light.
Yeah, yeah, yep. There's a few of them. Now, this
Yeah,
person here, John, says that so motivation is to destroy innocence. It is difficult to comprehend that, and it
correct,
is. And it.
correct. It's still hard for me, but
Oh, yeah, I think it is for everybody who's
that's
got any kind of a heart. And
right.
Penny says, so any drags wanting to do this uh, in the blue level will not continue, right?
My own how I would respond is you're not going to see a guy in drag and blue around kids.
Okay.
Because he has a conscience and he knows he
Okay.
doesn't want to influence. He knows the influence he's having on kids. It would be like this: you have a couple of adults watching TV, and there's kids in the house.
Yeah.
You can figure out I'm staring at the chart. You can figure out what programs are in that house, where the kids permitted around the TV when certain programs are being shown. We even call it family hour. Isn't that interesting? We could almost, right, when it gets later,
Right.
we're assuming that kids are in bed.
Yeah.
Why is it now? This is sort of interesting. You can reverse that. You look at when kids are home alone. This is very important. HBO and other things. Guess what shows are being shown like at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock when the parents are distracted?
I don't know.
You reverse it. Those things that are going to mar the conscience. So parents don't know that these kids are accessing programs that are attacking everything from sexuality. The way to, in the ultimate sense, this is what's so important. If you want to impact a kid and you want to capture him for life, so to speak, you impact his sexuality. And
Mm.
now he's easy pickings. And if I'm a cult leader, meaning if I'm a perpetrator, one and the same, really. If I want to impact a kid, I'm going to cross his boundaries. I'm going to dismantle his intuition so he can't figure out really what's going on. I'm going to work it. I'm going to work him. He and I are going to have this little special relationship. And then with every predator, what goes up? Secrets. It's our little secret. So it's mind games. That's what cults do. And then it's us versus them, us versus the world. Don't tell your parents. And then, but inevitably, at some point in time, every victim starts to, right? There's that moment. And at that moment, the predator knows it. And what happens? Now they flip. And now the reality. And every survivor remembers that moment where, I mean, if they were ever sucked in by him, when all of a sudden it's like, this isn't fun anymore. This doesn't, and the moment the victim wants to start to back away, in a split second, you're going to see he morphs. And I'll tell you what, the movie Tangled, though it doesn't have to do with sex offending, but if you want to see Mother Gothel, at the very end of that movie, the Pixar or Disney film, you watch that about Rapunzel, and watch the very end scene. Mother Gothel, the mother that supposedly cares, but she actually stole the kid, has Rapunzel in a tower. Rapunzel wants to start to venture forth. Mother Gothel needs to keep her stuck. There's a song in there that is so cultic perfect, which is Mother Knows Best. Go listen to that song because it inverts intuition. And it was all about, oh, you need to stay in the tower. And when Rapunzel finally figured out, you could see it. They did a wonderful job. It's all of a sudden like, wait a second, who's been doing what for whom? Mother Gothel changes. And out come the chains. And I got you, and you're not there. The question is, did Mother Gothel change, or did she morph into revealing her true self? That's who these guys are, because level one, at level one, they have a conscience, and everybody with a conscience is very sensitive to others. It doesn't take much to read the face of someone if all of a sudden I can see that I'm corrupting their morals. And if I care about someone, if I care about kids especially, I don't want kids to all of a sudden take my dress, so to speak, and all of a sudden think, oh, well, I can even get sexier.
Right. Right.
And they're not stupid. This is 2000. This is year 2019. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
And so and men that dress in drag knows what's really going on in that culture behind the scenes. It's dark. Look at Amazing Desmond.
Oh.
Right? You can't tell me that kid hasn't been perked on multiple times. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And Penny says you are spot on about the lack of efficacy of castration. And this person,
I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but
I know.
you know, when it came from the inmates themselves, they'd say, "Oh, I'd do it." I'm thinking,
Yeah.
"Oh my gosh."
And this
That told me anything one of these perpetrators going to do that they're really eager. There's some stuff behind it.
right. And this person says drag queen story hour is the farm team for the trans movement. I think they like that term.
It's true. Why? Because once these kids
Yeah.
become used to the dress, then you see Amazing Desmond.
Yes.
And all these kids on
Yeah. They're getting attention.
runways, fashion show, right?
Getting,
fashion shows.
yes, but John, they're getting the attention that they're
right.
not getting from healthy parents with good healthy guidelines and good healthy boundaries and loving no when it's appropriate. Their kids.
That's right.
That.
That's right. And spend time on survivorsupport.net under insights. Go through that whole thing on predators. Go through that on the predator game plan, because there's one video somebody put together about how they're having kids do fashion shows, the drag queen kids.
Yes, yes.
And it shows, and I did a whole commentary on it. Mm-hmm. You look at who's in the audience, and there were two flaming guys that were predators. Yeah. How do I know? Come on, I worked 11 years with sex offenders. These guys were lusting over those kids. And if you can't see in that crowd, if you can't spot men salivating over young kids, I know. You're blind, deaf, and dumb. I don't know. You're a threat to these kids. You're handing these kids over to predators.
Exactly.
Sorry.
That's okay. And this person says targeting autistic kids who are, I have to move this up because I'm having trouble seeing, who are sitting ducks, those already preyed upon, and those on social media. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's right. And I defy anybody else. And who else is in the trans movement? All the predators.
Of course.
So, I want to say this. Will everybody in the trans movement raise your hand? And I want to see them. My guess is this. This is just my own hunch. 80 to 90% are going to be late teens and older. Well, I thought this was about the kids. It's not about the kids. If it's about kids, it means they need emotional support, they need help. And I want to share this with you too. And I checked with a good therapist friend of mine who's been doing therapy for 35 years. I've done therapy for 30. I worked with kids in the system. And I'm telling you, not one time. I worked residential treatment, kids in the system, taken out of the home, multiple placement failures. Not once. And I'm open, right? The kid comes in, he's got a lot of issues. You let him talk. Not one time. And this was back in the 90s and early 2000. Never once out of all those kids. And same thing for Mary Lou. I said, did you ever see a trans? She said, never heard of it. This is a new phenomenon. So it either means this: all therapists from a certain point, 5 years ago and back, including all the theorists, and go all the way back to Freud, but Adler and I could listen to Rogers and everybody. They all missed it. All my professors in school missed it. Everybody prior to 2015 missed it. So either this is a real thing, and how were we all brain dead to miss it, or this is not a real thing. This is contrived. This is contrived, and this has all been coordinated.
Yes, there's big money behind it too, John.
There you go. That's right.
Big money behind it with another agenda. And the thing is, I think that, like many things, the drag queen group has been co-opted. It's been taken over, hijacked, taken over. That's what's happened to it. you know.
That's right. Well, and the same thing that happened. Look at the Gay Pride Parade.
Yes, same thing.
Okay, I'm not much. I'm right. I'm not much into that.
Nope,
But you look what's happened over the past 20 years, and you cannot tell me what you see marching down the streets now is the same thing as 20 years ago.
not at all.
Okay, but I'm here to tell people that was planned.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, yes, exactly, exactly.
Okay? I'm telling you, it's a pedophile game plan. I'm not. This is not calling names.
Oh,
In order to help kids, in order to help protect kids, we got to know what we're dealing with. If there are no predators, I'm more than happy. But you know what? If there's sharks in the water, maybe you could.
yeah.
Can you bring up the scene from Jaws?
You never gave it to me.
Oh, dang it. Okay. Well, everybody, I
That's
said
okay.
it. But everybody's familiar with the scene where they're at the billboard. It's one of my favorite scenes. You got the mayor and Sheriff Brody, and they're in front of that billboard. I forget the name of the town, but the question is this. You had two people that were in a disagreement. You had the sheriff who seemed to believe there was something in the water. But you had the mayor that was saying, basically, shut your mouth, don't stir the waters. Everything was fine until you started stirring the waters, sheriff.
Right.
And the question is this, who's right and who should shut his mouth?
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you, we got to get a bigger boat.
Yeah.
Right?
This person says quite aptly, I can't even trust Disney channels anymore.
Oh, that's right. That's right. It's been co-opted.
Yeah, totally.
When you start doing a Google search on how many Disney, forget just employees, there are tons of those. How many Disney executives have been busted for child porn? One of the vice presidents.
Right.
But now, does that mean 100%? It doesn't take that much.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, when you have upper level executives, that ain't by accident.
Right.
Little by little, meaning how do you groom a kid?
Right.
Little by little.
Well, John, we're kind of moving on here, so I think that I'm just going to make a comment about some responses on what I have found that works. Now, I've spent probably the last 7 years on social media on both YouTube and Facebook with a few channels and pages, and in certain ways, I've had my share of haters and that sort of thing, and I've learned.
That's right.
A few,
Blowback. We're talking about that. Sorry.
yeah, a few things about that. So, I'm just going to share some gems that I found that helped me. I've found it important not to play the game that they want you to play. A good strategy is to take longer to answer their attacks or their comments. Don't answer them right away. Because, like somebody said, it's like a heroin hit to them when you do that, when you engage in that sort of thing. Or when you can see pretty quickly there is no chance for respectful debate, simply hit block and delete. And what I found works well first is to, in the private message, send a respectful, even though they may not have been with you, because it's always good to kind of, sort of, not feed hate into hate, I believe. Leave a respectful, well, I hope that you find something better where you're looking. I stand my ground and respectfully wish you well. And that's all, and then I don't bother with them again. And the second thing is to become acutely aware as to what is possible in conversations. Some conversations you can have, others you can't. And some conversations you can really get in depth, others you can't because it's too much, as you said earlier, John. And understanding your own triggers. When somebody calls you a name or says something to you that's really hurtful, how does that trigger you? So if you understand, you know how to deal with it if you can see that coming at you. And know when there is simply no possible communication, cease the activity. Just cease it. Leave again with respectful good wishes because it helps to keep the door open, and unlock the perhaps the militant ignorance that many people have. They just they're when they're militant in their ignorance, they do not want to know. But if even they took one grain of what you may have said, you never know how it plants a seed, and then something may happen with them some other place or some other conversation. It all feeds into maybe maybe becoming aware, maybe hitting that crisis point when somebody changes. We don't know. You know, we're not responsible for others. We're not responsible for how others take what we say. We're responsible for what we say, what we do, but we're not responsible for how they respond to us. And that's really important. It took me a while to figure that out. And like, especially when you're trying to really help somebody and it's just not going anywhere, and you think, oh, come on, come on, come on. But you have to realize you're not going to change anybody that doesn't want to change. You're not going to change their thinking. You're not going to change anything. But it is your responsibility to put it out there. When you know better, to share it. That's just what conclusions I come to on the subject of dealing with these people. So wherever you can have a conversation, fantastic. But when you can't, let it go, because it doesn't do anything for you. So, John, there's a couple of more things here I just wanted to mention. Franny Banani. There's a new video exposing pedo drag queen who is allowed to read to children. Drag queen story hours. What does he say? This is sick. Yes, Franny, I believe I've put that on the page. There's it's a drag queen in a beard, actually.
It's not even attractive.
And he is a kindergarten teacher.
Oh boy. Mm-hmm.
I mean, the LGBT indoctrination is rolling out across North America in conjunction with this drag queen story. Can't tell me that that's not correlated. And let me see, Amazing Desmond, someone says. Now, Pauline has a question or a comment. The media is also enabling this. CBC is 100% behind the trans cult and drag kids. The only people being silenced are those who speak out. Sure. And she's absolutely right. And then Penny says, what are some tips on to counter the blowback many of us are experiencing? Yes. I think we answered those. Do you have any other tips, John, as to how to deal with people?
Yeah. Yeah, I would just simply add, and what you said was excellent, Sharon. I would simply add this. You could take this same chart that I have in front of me still, and at some point in time I'll develop it. I have developed it, but I'll put it in graphic form for us here. In this chart, it's all about selfishness. You also can have a chart dealing with fear. It always comes down to this. You have to discern who you're dealing with, because you don't want to cast your pearls before swine. Okay? So if you're dealing with a fear-based person, that means they don't intend to be hurtful, but they can't hear you for their fear, so they'll be emotionally reactive on a scale of 1 to 10. And so it all depends upon, so sometimes we'll encounter those people. Mm-hmm. And if somebody's given pushback, but they're not actively deviant or hurtful, so this would be somebody that's defending them, they probably either have somebody in their life, somebody in their family, and the fear of the meaning and the implications. If you tell someone, I really think that guy's deviant, I think he's in porn, and he's probably a child predator, you watch. I had somebody kind of near in my family that somebody said, hey, did you know? And it's like, what? We've all, a lot of us kind of, right? And so what's that? That's part of me saying, my circuit, look, my brains are going to come out. I can't, right? And so the question is, to what extent is that person open? If somebody is fear-based, all you can do is plant seeds. And you're never going to, if they go, no, you're right, you're not going to yank their ears off. But if they're dealing with selfishness, then it's a different ballgame, because the fear-based person is trying to protect themselves. The selfish person, the deviant person, is trying to shut your mouth because you're disclosing truth. Mm-hmm. Big difference. On social media, I would say kind of get a sense of this chart, and anybody from 2 on, and you can find out real fast because they'll morph. Don't deal with anybody at a 3, 4, 5 or beyond. Just don't deal with them. If you want to get a good example, because you're going to have a good reason, because you're going to get chewed up, spit out, to pull you in the mud. They will tie you in knots. Why? Because that's who they are. Forget the deviants. They're already that way. We all have family members that are really mean, right? Okay, you layer that with deviants. The best thing you can do is, if you sense someone's like a level 3 or beyond, don't deal with them. Why? Because you can see they're already entrenched in selfishness. They're violating their conscience. Therefore, they want to pull you in the mud too. You're not going to redeem them. The best you can do is throw that out there. If unless you have a really good reason to, do not interact with them. If you want to see some really pretty intense ones, go on my Twitter page and my Facebook. Now, why do I do that? I do it all for education purposes. I'm sort of now disclosing to these guys, but it doesn't matter. Okay. The reason why I interact with them is to capture, eventually I'll have an entire training on this, because there's about 6 different layers. You take this chart, turn it vertically, there's layers downward in terms of just really, really rank stuff in their soul. And I want people to see what's under the surface, because they start out looking like nice. So I do it for training purposes.
Okay.
So go on there. What I would say is, don't engage. You're going to get chewed up, spit out. Don't expect anything good to come from that conversation. If you want, spend time on my 2 pages, Facebook or Twitter. Keep scrolling and you'll see. I've tried to help people see what they say, and maybe, but unless you're doing it for a good reason, don't waste your time.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of people here. Penny says sometimes it's easier said than done. If you are passionate about your concerns for child safety, it can really make your blood boil.
That's right.
And then Wendy says it's hard not to take the vile comments personally.
There you go.
Those
That's right.
good points. So I'm going to share a story about the Yaniv thing. You know, the dude with the crown. Well,
Wax on, wax off.
oh yeah, but you know, as a woman, I get incensed when the media and he talks about biological women's healthy, natural, beautiful functioning of their bodies. When he talks about our menstruation or our lactation or anything like that, I am triggered beyond. So yesterday, and you know about this, John, he had put something up about this, and I was going to send him a letter personally because I really wanted to give it back to him. And after talking with you and my sister and stuff, and I drafted something right away. And I've always found that when you're that angry, if you write something out right away, it doesn't matter the grammar, the spelling, or anything, just get it out, get it out, get it out on paper. Have a kind of a game plan what you're going to do about it, and then go to bed. Have caffeine first, and then think about, okay, now let's revisit this. Put the world in a better place with some caffeine. Think about this again. And so I've decided instead that I'm going to redraft the letter as a letter from the citizens to our politicians about Yaniv, Ogier, and some of these guys and what it's doing, and put it out there and ask people, here's the letter already done for you. Send it to your MP, your MPP, and your city council, your mayor, whatever, so that you're doing something, you're sharing it with others to do something, and something good is coming out of it. So what that has done for me is it's brought me right back down. I've taken my power back. I've done something constructive with it. And I haven't spun my wheels with somebody where I'm not going to make any gains anyway. So that's going to be different for everybody, but that's another way. I absolutely support 1,000% the use of journaling your feelings, both your good experiences and your not so good ones. And it's amazing the power that is in journaling. And when you go back to look at certain things for help, it's just the very best. So that's another thing that you can do when you've got a child or a family member or whatever that's really important to you and your blood is boiling. It's a one way of dealing with it, and I'm sure others have other ways. You could, some people really like to work their energy off physically with cycling or boxing or doing whatever. It's different for everybody, but I'm just sharing what works for me, and it works very well, and it goes to the greater good too. So that's what I do with guys like Yaniv, the wax on, wax off guy. Now, I want to say something, John, just while I'm, got my mouth yammering here. Ladies, gentlemen, friends, in Canada, we have an election coming up, and it's coming fast around the bend. Um, are you aware? I want you guys to know this. Are you aware that the NDP have joined the Liberals to push the pronoun issue? And that Morgan Auger, who helped to remove the funding for the oldest rape crisis center in Vancouver, and who also coached Yaniv, and who also won $55,000 from the Human Rights Tribunal in Vancouver for a man that misgendered, calling him what he is, a man. He is the vice president of the NDP party in BC, and he's running as an MP. It's important for people to know that. So all our BC friends know that, share that, talk it up, okay? You don't want people like this in. Make sure to ask each of your candidates and call them if they haven't visited you and ask them what to do and will they repeal Bill C-16 and remove the protected class status from the ever-growing LGBTQ plus community, or what will they do to enforce laws that protect women and children from people like Yaniv and Auger? And what will they do to intervene and work toward removing the human rights commissions across the country, as they have become very costly and they're a farce? And be sure to get a straight answer. Okay, I had to. It's a plug for we Canadians.
Sure.
Our votes are important, and I know that many of us feel like there isn't anybody to vote for. I feel like homeless. But the only party that's going to repeal it is the People's Party of Canada. Are they perfect? No. But they're the only one that's going to do something about it. The NDP are a lost cause. The Liberals are a lost cause, and this is in my opinion. And the Greens, I ran for the Greens in the last election. They're a lost cause. No, none of them. It depends on what's important to you. And of course, there's so many other things that are important in this coming election. But for women and children, this is essential. And if we don't stop this freight train from going through by standing up to this bill and these issues, believe me, it's going to overtake us. Pedophilia is going to become legitimized. And then there won't be anything much we can do about it. So, okay, is the soapbox put away? Yep, it is.
Well said.
And I just and while I'm at it, folks, I want to show, if I can here. Let me go over here, John, for a second. And I want to show a picture of this person here. She, Magdalena, she is a woman from the UK that is just a brilliant, wonderful lesbian who has taken Twitter, in not Twitter but YouTube, by storm in a way. She has a channel that I highly recommend you go to watch, because she nails it on target about the whole trans community, and she's very, very funny about it. Now, unfortunately, she has a brain tumor, and she's not doing well. So if we keep her in your prayers or whatever you do, that would be really good. But if you need some lighthearted, straightforward, right on the target stuff, please take a look at her channel and enjoy all the things that she has to say. So Is there anything else, John, that you'd like to add before we wrap things up here?
I would just second your concerns, Sharon, whether in Canada or here. Um, Women really need to be concerned, and this is not hyperbole. I'm going to be literal.
Mm-hmm.
The trans issue has been hijacked, but it's not hijacked. This was the Trojan horse. Okay, the pedophiles embedded themselves, allowed the women to do the heavy lifting, allowed the women to attack the issue of gender. Now, again, we don't need to get into a lot other than this. Once you started to fool around with that, what they did is they took the ball and ran with it. And I'm not talking about misogyny, so no to go. But what you have is the pedophiles know that right now they are within arm's reach of kids, but there's one um, speed bump, there's one hurdle, and that has to do with women. So if you've ever thought there's been a war on women, this is now men going to war on women, and they put on dresses because these are porn saturated, deviant pedophiles. And I'm going to use a French term. They're going to beat the hell out of women until the women are submitted. And they are intent upon, I can make the case, they will, if they have their way, they're going to eradicate women. Women better be very concerned about this. Their goal is to eradicate women.
Well, look what they've done to the lesbian community.
That's right.
Pride and the trans. I mean, when trans can stand there and say, "It's the future. The future is men or women will have penises." Like this is insanity gone off the rails. We've got to join. We've got to join together, and we have to stick together. And here's something, gang: when you're out there, fighting, doing what you can, trying to illuminate, we've got this page, and there are other pages that are like this, that we can come and we have a group of like-minded people who are supportive and caring, and will stick together, and you can lick your wounds, and we'll be there for each other. We've got to have this, because one person by themselves, believe me, it's impossible. It's impossible. I've been that. I've done that, and it killed me. So where when we can hold each other up to go forward, we can and we will, and join with others, we can overcome this, but we have to be dedicated to it.
And ultimately, keep in mind, this is about child protection. That's
Yes.
all this is.
Child protection and women and children's safety.
Absolutely. That's right. That's right.
So, okay. Well, thank you very, very much, John, for all that you've relayed with us this evening. And I just appreciate everything. And people, thank you so much for your participation. It was fabulous. And please kindly share this. I will have the replay up afterwards, and I will put it on my advocacy channel as well. Now, the subject of our next live will be cleansing ourselves from this moral trauma and calibrating our resilience to stay healthy with mental health first aid instructor Penny McLean. Stay tuned for the date and time of the notification. In the meantime, please give thought to what you do that's comforting, soothing, nurturing, and healthy for you, so that we can collectively share what works while we continue to stand against this insanity. Okay? Thank you so much for your contribution, John. It was just wonderful. And thank you, folks, for your participation. We will see you next time.